I only have one request. Please wash your freaking hands before you play this deck. So, I was just in the middle of eating food at the local Taco Mac with all of my friends after the card shop, which is a thing we typically do. Let me go ahead and spread this out there for anybody who maybe hasn't already. If you enjoy spending time at your card shop with all of your friends there, when the card shop closes, maybe go ahead and make it a habit to go out to eat with them afterwards. Even if it's at like one of your houses or something, anything to extend that time where your mental health is not being drained constantly by the world around you, especially after the events of, well, not this video, but certainly the 20th. Anyway, since our human rights seem to be getting taken away, let's go ahead and take other people's things away. Like their trading cards. Gonti Canny Acquisitioner is a Sultai and 2 really just kind of all-around huge commander with a lot of things going for him. He makes all of your spells that you do not own, but you are still casting, cost 1 less to cast, and whenever one or more of your creatures deal combat damage to a player, you get to take the top card of their library, throw it face down in exile, and then you can cast that card anytime you want. Now, I did already do a video on Gonti a while back where I was upgrading the Grand Larceny Precon. That Precon needed a lot of work, and one of the big issues that it had is that so many cards in the original list costed a crap ton of mana. And, well, Gonti doesn't want cards that cost a ton of mana because he wants to be spending that mana on your opponent's cards. Now, the original deck did contain some ways to discount the cards you were stealing, but there is no guarantee that you will have those in your hand at any given time, especially when the Precon didn't contain tutors, nor should it have in the first place, but it means that we need to make sure that our deck is running very, very low to the ground. And luckily, there is a kind of creature that runs low to the ground naturally, but also allows Gonti to do his thing. I am, of course, talking about very low mana evasive creatures, Baleful Strix being one of the greatest examples of this. Not only is it a cantrip that will replace itself when it touches the board, but it is also a flying death touch creature, which means it is very, very versatile in both being an evasive creature that can trigger Gonti and a just big bulwark in case anybody tried to swing something big like a dragon at you. Nobody wants to aim their 10/10 at you when you have a 1/1 that always wins combat. We're going to be running 8 cards in this deck that focus only on tiny evasive creatures, but don't worry, these are not the only evasive creatures in the deck. We are running quite a few more. They are just in other sections of the deck and perform other functions besides just being evasive creatures. But speaking of mana efficiency, we can generate evasive creatures way, way faster than just summoning them from our hand by using cards like Bitter Blossom that can just shoot them out onto the ground anytime our upkeep begins. We can also make sure that we are getting close to the finish line with Nighthawk Scavenger as an evasive creature. One issue that Spell Thief style decks tend to have is they don't know how to actually close out games. So we need to make sure that some of our evasive creatures are big enough to end the game on their own, regardless of whether or not we have stolen the appropriate amount of spells from our opponents to win the game. I'm sure it seems like a fun strategy to just use all of your opponent's win cons, but we can't guarantee that, so we need a good backup plan, and combat has always been an effective one in Magic the Gathering. Let's go ahead and supplement that combat with Draina, Liberator of Malakir. Not only does she have flying and first strike, which means she can actually get multiple triggers of Gonti on a turn for you, but when she deals combat damage to a player, put a 1/1 counter on each attacking creature you control. This will allow your slowly building board of evasive dudes to get bigger and bigger and cause more damage as the game goes on. Though this will lead to us creating a bit of an arch-enemy scenario, but I have a couple answers to that later on in the video. Silent Hall Creeper is another fantastic newer card from Duskmourn. It can't be blocked, it gets 2 1/1 counters on its own, it lets you draw a card, and it can become a copy of any other creature you control, allowing it to be a Nighthawk Scavenger with 2 additional 1/1 counters, a Baleful Strix with some very wonderful stats. 3/3 flying and death touch is really hard to deal with, or you can even have it become a copy of another creature we are running at the top end of our mana, and that is Archon of Cruelty. Now, Archon of Cruelty may seem like an odd include here, especially after I mentioned that we need to be lowering the mana curve of our deck from what the original Precon did, but let me go ahead and make my case here. Well, first, We are not always going to be summoning Archon of Cruelty full cloth. Sometimes we will be casting him with a Reanimate or a Breach the Multiverse, which are going to be giving us a lot more bang for their buck when we grab him. But over and above that, this card proves that he does so many jobs all at once. At 6/6, he's already helping you close out games with your opponents in casual settings. He also allows you to have life gain to deal with opponents who are running very fast decks. He gives you the ability to drain people's life, so even if they are immune to things like combat damage, we still have a way to get into them. And most importantly, he is both removal and a draw engine. Whenever he touches the battlefield or attacks, an opponent sacks a creature, discards a card, you draw a card, you gain 3 life, they lose 3 life. It does so many things, and it also helps you close out games. And there is one other issue with the original deck we are padding out, and that is making sure we have a better, more comprehensive ramp section so that we can get to bigger spells or more of our opponent's spells. This will also lead to us being able to cast Archon of Cruelty more often, as we'll be able to just curve into him by turn 5 or 6 without even having to really try too terribly hard. Let's also throw in a Lantern Bearer into here, because Lantern Bearer being a 1-mana 1/1 with Flyer is already nice and evasive, but if he happens to die for any reason, we're going to transform him into Lantern's Lift, which will give a creature 1/1 and flying from the graveyard. We can use Lantern's Lift to power up Gaunty and allow him to start doing commander damage to players to end the game that way as well. And also, this allows Gaunty to trigger his own ability, giving you access to your opponent's spells. We'll also run Meringue River Prowler. It can't block, it can't be blocked, and does have a prohibited cost of being a 3-mana 2/1, but we can cast him from our graveyard so long as we have a black or green permanent. We do run into the issue of causing psychic damage to our opponents because we are running an arch-enemy deck. Not that we are playing an arch-enemy style deck, but we are playing a Spell Thief deck, and players really don't like hearing that it's a wonderful compliment that they have such good spells in their decks that we want to be the ones casting them. So instead, let's go ahead and make sure that our strategy is nice and resilient. We pay a little bit of extra mana for Meringue River Prowler, but we gain the ability to recur him later in the game in case we suffer a board wipe. Also, because we happen to be in a situation where our deck is likely to be number 1 on the chopping block, so people don't have to deal with our spell thieving, we are going to be running a fully 5-card protection package. Heroic Intervention to keep our entire board safe, Lightning Greaves and Swiftfoot Boots to protect Gaunty and give our looters haste, Revitalizing Repast as an MDFC that can be used to protect Gaunty or any other creature that we need, and Winged Boots, which is another way to give Gaunty evasion, give him Ward 4 as well. This just does everything we want. It protects a creature, and it allows it to just get in there and trigger Gaunty. We also can't rely on Gaunty all the time. He is a cost-prohibitive commander, requiring all the colors in our deck, and also just being a 5-mana commander in general. Those get removed once or twice in the game, and it feels like you can't play them anymore. So let's go ahead and have a nice backup strategy of spell thieving, but let's make sure that most of our spell thieving cards cost a lot less than what was originally in the precon. We are going to be keeping the Arcane Heist from the original build, and we are also going to be keeping the Smirking Spelljacker. Spelljacker, as a flash flying creature, already gets in there and triggers Gaunty, and it can exile a spell, so it operates as a pseudo counter spell, and then whenever it attacks, we can cast that card whenever we want. The Arcane Heist just casts anything from an opponent's graveyard and then ciphers onto one of our cards. It's worth the 4 mana to get a free spell from an opponent's grave and just be able to repeat it over and over and over again. Likely, if you're casting Arcane Heist, just grab a removal spell from an opponent's graveyard to clear the way for you, and then swing at that opponent once more with your evasive creature to trigger it again on the turn you did it. On our high-cost cards, we are going to be running a Diluvian Primordial and a Sepulchre Primordial. These do cost a lot, but remember, we do have a couple ways to reanimate them, which will cut their cost down, and also, these do one thing that the original precon did not do very well. When these touch the board, they immediately steal spells from the opponent on cast. Well, not on cast, on entering the battlefield. This means that instead of having to get those cards and maybe eventually play them later on in the game, we immediately get those cards when we drop these on the board, giving us instant value. The Sepulchre Primordial gives you 3 creatures from your opponent's graveyards, and the Diluvian Primordial gets you 3 instants or sorceries from your opponent's graveyards. Many times, this is enough to swing a game entirely in your favor with these cards on their own, which justifies their high mana cost, as far as I'm concerned. We're also going to be running the original Gonti, Lord of Luxury, as well. He's got Death Touch, so he's got pseudo-evasion. Nobody really likes blocking this dude. And, of course, when he touches the battlefield, look at the top 4 cards of an opponent's library, grab one of them, and that is yours for the casting. Let's also add in some more evasive creatures that can steal stuff from your opponents. We have Night Veil Spectre, which lets you exile the top card of your opponent's library and then cast it whenever you want. And, of course, Thief of Sanity, which deals combat damage to a player. And then you look at the top 3 cards of their library and throw one face down and exile. You can then cast that whenever you want. It should be noted, with Night Veil Spectre, you do have to have the correct mana costs in order to cast cards from your opponent. So you may want to focus on yanking lands from opponents, or making sure that you are targeting opponents with this that are operating within your colors, unless we have an exotic orchard down where we can circumvent that. Villainous Wealth is another pseudo top end of our deck. If we have enough mana from our ramp package, this should allow us to take an opponent almost out of the game instantaneously. We target an opponent and we exile the top X cards of their library and then cast all of those that we want, so long as their mana value is less than what we are sinking into Villainous Wealth. This means if we grab, say, 10 cards from an opponent's library, we can cast any card in there so long as its mana value is less than 10, which is 90% of Magic the Gathering. In an ideal world, if we manage to get to that much mana, we should definitely be winning the game off of that many free resources from an opponent. At least, I would hope so. We're also going to run Rev Tithe Extractor. She is a fantastic creature in her own right, but she is basically just a second copy of Gonti for us. Whenever we attack, we can give a creature Death Touch, giving it pseudo-evasion, and whenever a creature we have deals combat damage to a player, we create a treasure token, allowing us to use things like the Night Veil Spectre, and then we get to look at their top card of their library and exile it face down, and cast that card. Much like the Night Veil Spectre, Rev does not allow us to cast these cards for any mana value whatsoever, but she does give us extra access to Spell Thief and ramp with the treasures. And then we have Puppeteer Clique. Puppeteer Clique enters the battlefield and steals a creature card from an opponent's graveyard and throws it onto our battlefield with haste. And then at the beginning of our next end step, we exile that card. That should be enough to make sure that we are able to take all of our opponent's cards, but we have another key that we can use to steal lots of their cards all at once, and that is Breach the Multiverse. This is going to be part of our 5-card Recursion package. Breach the Multiverse makes each player mill 10 cards, and then for each player we grab a creature or a Planeswalker card and summon those to our board. Then, of course, they all become Phyrexians, which is completely irrelevant to what our deck is doing. But this just gigantic top-end spell swings games in your favor instantaneously. Take the best creature from each player's graveyard and just aim them at them like a gun. We're also going to run some MDFCs, Malakir Rebirth to replace Gonti in case he dies, Balagan Recovery to grab anything in our grave in case we need. It's also a land on the backside, which is great, and Agadeem's Awakening, which allows us to return from our graveyard any number of target creatures that have different converted mana costs X or less. And, of course, it is an MDFC on the backside. Agadeem's Awakening is fantastic in our deck because we have lots of creatures of varying mana costs, 1, 2, and 3 being the most common, but then we have cards like Archon of Cruelty and the Primordials that still have different mana costs available to them. We could use this to swing a game in our favor very handedly, or just, be a land early in the game if we are missing our land drops. And then, of course, Reanimate, because Reanimate can steal any card from any graveyard while also just being a fantastically costed animation spell in its own right. If you want, you could also throw Animate Dead into here, and that would take more cards from your opponent, which would be great, but we're sticking with just the one right now because we need to have room for other things. Like being able to draw lots of cards. While I do appreciate that hitting our opponents with any of our evasive creatures is effectively draw because it is increasing the amount of spells we can cast, I do think that traditional draw still has a very powerful place in our deck. Let's make sure that we're supplementing the combat strategy of our deck with Bident of Thassa, Enduring Curiosity, Grazilex Illithid Scholar, and Toski Bearer of Secrets, as well as Reconnaissance Mission. Each of these allow us to draw a card whenever whenever our creatures deal combat damage to a player. This allows us to dig through and find the best looters, the best removal spells, the best counter spells, and even board wipes, so that we can make sure that we are always in the dominant position. Again, we are going to draw a lot of aggro from our opponents because nobody likes being the one who has their cards stolen from them. So we need to keep a nice and plump hand of spells that we can use to get rid of all of their problematic cards. Fairy Mastermind is an evasive creature that we can use as well that will allow us to piggyback off of our opponent's draws. Just another way to steal their fun away. Shadowmage Infiltrator has Fear, so it's evasive, and gives you a draw whenever it deals combat damage to a player. The Wharf Infiltrator gives you looting when it deals combat damage to a player, and the ability to make Eldrazi horrors later in the game too. Suspicious Stowaway, Looter Ilkor, and Shoreline Looter are all looters worded very similarly as well. When they deal combat damage, you draw a card and then discard a card with an asterisk. If you have Shoreline Looter, that asterisk is if you've got Threshold, then you just won't discard the card. And with Suspicious Stowaway, that asterisk is making everybody hate you by making them play with the day-night mechanic, where it can turn into regular draw if it is nighttime. And then we have the Likeness Looter, who lets you draw and discard cards, throwing reanimation targets into the graveyard for us, and also just being an evasive creature in his own right. But one of the reasons I really like the Likeness Looter is that we can use him to become a copy of anything in our graveyard. Imagine you're in a situation where your opponent has gotten rid of your Toski Bearer of Secrets. They might have discarded it out of your hand, or who knows. They just don't want you having access to the card, so the card is now gone in your grave. Your Likeness Looter draws and discards a card and doesn't find anything that you need. So in desperation, you pay 4 mana and you transform the Likeness Looter into a copy of Toski in your grave. You then punch your opponent with your Shoreline Looter, and now your opponents are staring down you drawing 2 every single time you just get handsy with their life points. In my experience, I have found that Likeness Looter always pulls more weight than he seems like he does. He's just a merfolk looter with flying taped on and the ability to be whatever you want him to be. Much like a Ditto in Pokemon, and hopefully less like a Vaporeon. That said, we do need to make sure that our opponents aren't able to win the game outright, so let's go ahead and go into our removal package that we are going to use to take care of all of our opponents' problematic cards. Remember, our removal package is also supplemented by the removal cards we steal from our opponents. We are going to run a somewhat beefy 13-card removal package, but a lot of these cards serve double duty, which is fantastic for a deck like this. Our basic removal spells are going to be things like Assassin's Trophy and Beast Within, and Feed the Swarm. These just blow up a single permanent when we need them to, and are mana efficient at doing so. Then we have the counter spells of Drown in the Loch, Negate, and Counterspell itself. These are, again, mana efficient ways to get rid of things that are on the stack, but if it's Drown in the Loch, this can also get rid of a card that is already on the board and causing you problems. Now, if we are in a situation where we have become arch enemy, Windgrace's Judgment will pull a lot of weight here, getting rid of a problematic card from each player's board all at once. Let's also have Trigon Predator here, because it is an evasive creature in its own right that allows you to blow up artifacts and enchantments when it hits people. Imagine how it feels to lose a Bolas's Citadel, stare at the top card of your deck while I yank it from you all at once with Trigon Predator. But, of course, if it's Bolas's Citadel, I've probably just taken a land from you, in which case, suck it. Then we have the MDFC's Fell the Profane and Hagra Mauling for easy removal options that can be lands on their backside, letting us inflate our land count without getting rid of deck utility. Then, let's add in the cards that pull double duty. Virtue of Persistence gets rid of a creature with Indestructible by giving it -3/-3, and also turns into a reanimation spell that can steal cards from anybody's graveyard. Speaking of stealing cards from anybody's graveyard, Eldest Reborn can also do that after making every opponent sacrifice a creature and discard a card. And then, it just reanimates a thing from their graveyards. Let's also have Binding the Old Gods, as it will ramp us and also blow up any non-land permanent we want, and give give all of our creatures pseudo evasion when it ticks the 3rd time. Finally, for board wipes, we are going to run In Garruk's Wake and Plague Wind. These cards I chose because they do not affect us whatsoever, and we are in green, so there are many times where we can afford to cast these cards. Yes, we don't get to hit them with a follow-up play like we would with a Damnation, but if our follow-up play is just attacking our opponents with violence because we didn't lose our board states, that's a fine enough reason to run these cards for me. In Garruk's Wake also gets rid of Planeswalkers, allowing us to focus more on hitting our opponents in the face instead of in the Planeswalkers, as many of our effects do not trigger when we try to get rid of Planeswalkers on our opponent's boards. That said, that should be enough to keep our opponents on the back foot and losing lots of their cards. Let's go ahead and talk about ramp, and then we'll go ahead and get into how to play this deck. We do need to have a somewhat beefy 12-card ramp package, not counting what the Binding the Old Gods was already doing for us, and one of these cards is more important than all the others, and that is, of course, Nature's Will. While not truly ramp, if it is increasing the amount of mana we have available in every turn, it is ramp enough for me. You could even add in a Bear Umbra as well if you wanted, but Bear Umbra is way easier to get rid of than Nature's Will is. Whenever one or more creatures we control deal combat damage to a player, tap all lands that player controls and untap all of ours. The reason I've included this is one of the issues the deck runs into is not having enough mana to cast our opponent's spells and our spells as well. So why don't we go ahead and use Nature's Will to cut out that middleman entirely? Now, we're going to cast all of our spells on the pre-combat main phase, enter combat, punch our opponents, untap all of our lands, and we can even sequence this to cast things at instant speed while threading in multiple untaps. But then, on main phase 2, now we have the ability to cast all of the spells we have stolen from our opponents because we just have the open mana now. Let's also have Sky Shroud Claim as another way to get a lot of mana on board really quickly. For 4 mana, this gives you 2 forest cards from your deck and puts them on the battlefield untapped. That does say forest, not basic forest, so this will be used to grab a Shockland and a Triome, anything that you need to fix your mana or just ramp up a lot. For single ramps, we're going to run Search for Tomorrow because it can be cast on turn 1, 3 visits, Sakura Tribe Elder, Rampant Growth, Farseek, and Nature's Lore. Each of these costs 2 mana and give you a variety of lands from the deck at a really reasonable rate, especially when you count the fact that Nature's Lore and 3 visits bring the land out untapped, meaning that they are on par for speed with cards like Arcane Signet, which everybody seems to love for some reason. Then we have Cultivate and Kadama's Reach, which grab us 2 basic lands from the deck, 1 into our hand and 1 onto the battlefield, which means we can sequence our mana and never miss a land drop. Finally, we're gonna put in a Soul Ring. Yay. That's enough of that card I hate. Let's go ahead and talk about our lands. We are going to be running 3 forests, 3 islands, and 2 swamps. Now, you may find that you need a couple more basic lands if you run out with just the 8 that are in this deck, but that should be enough to get you through most games, as we have lots of things that grab forests and other lands from the deck. Then we are going to run the Battle Bond lands, Underground Stadium, Rejuvenating Springs, and Morphic Pool, the check lands of Drowned Catacombs, Hinterland Harbor, and Woodland Cemetery, the fetching lands, Verdant Catacombs, Polluted Delta, Misty Rainforest, and Foreboding Landscape. Of course, we are running the filter lands as well, even though they are not the best lands at this price point, or not the best lands you could be running. They are some of the best lands for the price point, and I will always include them in decks where I can. We're going to run the Omni lands of the fetchable Zagoth Triome, Reflecting Pool because we have lots of cards with double pipping, Exotic Orchard, and Command Tower. The Exotic Orchard gets a very wonderful mention here because we have so many cards that can take cards from our opponent but do not allow us to filter their mana values. Then we have the Shocklands, of course, Watery Grave, Overground Tomb, and Breeding Pool, and then we have some utility lands to get access to. Bojuka Bog and Reliquary Tower are pretty obvious includes. We have lots of draw power and we want to get rid of our opponent's graves, but we also need to make sure that we are able to reset cards like Bojuka Bog and our MDFCs. So we are running a single bounce land to reset those cards. And then we have Minas Morgul Dark Forest, Fortress. This card always enters tapped, which I'm not a big fan of, but it allows us to put shadow counters on creatures, which means that it is that much harder to block them. This allows even non-evasive creatures in our deck like Toski to become evasive menaces that our opponent really will struggle to get rid of. Even making Gaunty have shadow is fantastic with this card. And that does it for everything in the deck, so all that's left to do is to talk about how to play it and get to some conclusions. So thank you for watching so far. Let's shuffle up some cardboard. Gaunty is a very hard commander to cast, so I would like to make sure that we have ramp in any hand we are starting with. With this starting hand, we have removal with Fell the Profane, ramp with Search for Tomorrow, and another piece of removal with Beast Within. We have no evasive creatures to play down, so this isn't really a good and keepable hand. But let's go ahead and play it out and see what happens. We draw for our opening turn, and we did manage to get a creature that we can use with Likeness Looter. So, looking at where we are at, what I would like to do is be able to play Hinterland Harbor into Morphic Pool to play the Likeness Looter on turn 2. Unfortunately, that actually locks us out of the better play, which is Forest first, Search for Tomorrow suspended. This Search for Tomorrow will be able to get a basic land out in 2 turns, and while I do not get the Likeness Looter as early as I would like, this still does put us in a better position mana-wise on follow-up turns. So we move into turn 2. There's a Baleful Strix, another thing we are losing by going this route, but that's not the worst thing in the world. Let's go ahead and drop the Morphic Pool down and pass to our opponents, and on turn 3, we draw Agadeem's Awakening. Well, not Agadeem's, sorry. The Search for Tomorrow has to go off first, which means our draw is actually Enduring Curiosity after searching up our land. So we're going to go ahead and play the Hinterland Harbor down. That comes into play untapped because we happen to have a forest here. And where we are at right now, I think the best thing to do is get Baleful Strix on the board. Or if an opponent's already played a commander, we may just Fell the Profane the damn thing. But I think I'm okay just dropping the Baleful Strix down. It'll draw us a card immediately and give us a nice blocker for follow-up turns. We move into turn 4 and we have the Suspicious Stowaway. Now, what we could do is drop Enduring Curiosity down and go ahead and start drawing up. But I think the best thing to do in this section right here is we're going to pay 2 mana, and we are going to get the Likeness Looter, or not the Likeness Looter, we're going to get the Suspicious Stowaway down so we have a draw engine in the next turn. We are then going to hold up this 3 mana for this Beast Within to be used on an opponent's card. We're going to use our Baleful Strix as a blocker and make sure that nobody can get to our life, and we will definitely be casting that Beast Within on an opponent's turn, getting rid of a problematic card. Their commander, maybe even a Soul Ring if they got it out too early, whatever you happen to think your opponents have that you need to get rid of on their turn, go ahead and cast that and get rid of them now. Now we've drawn into a Bitter Blossom. We are in a perfect space to just pay all of our mana into the Enduring Curiosity and swing the Stowaway and the Baleful Strix at maybe even one person. We don't have to swing it at multiple. That'll draw us 3 cards and let us discard 1 card. We'll discard this island, and we're going to go ahead and play our island down, and that gives us the ability to play our Bitter Blossom, which will start spawning us tokens throughout the game. Now, as of this moment, we are in a bit of an interesting scenario. I can't show you what Gaunty would take from our opponents, so we just have to assume that we have some gas from our opponents, but we are going to be playing as if we have nothing from them. It is my opinion that even Spell Thief decks should have the ability to stand up on their own and do their own thing, irrespective of what cards you get from your opponents. The cards from your opponents are supplementary. They are the gravy on top of the mashed potatoes that is your deck. So now we move into turn 6, and we have drawn a Rampant Growth. I would like to get a creature on the, or I'd like to get a land available to us so that we could cast the Rampant Growth, but I think it's time to go ahead and get Gaunty online. We play Gaunty here, and we also need to make sure that we have our 1/1 Fairy Rogue token out. Gaunty is available. We have 2 creatures to trigger Gaunty, and we draw 3 cards when we hit with those creatures. 1, 2, 3, and we discard 1 card when we do. Looking at our hand right now, The thing that I want more than anything is to throw this Sepulchre Primordial to the grave to reanimate it, but we are lacking a reanimation spell, and we may need it to just raw swing the game in our favor in the next turn. So we're going to pitch the Rampant Growth out and just let that be what we lose, because we drew the Sky Shroud Claim and the Nature's Lore, which are infinitely better than Rampant Growth. So, again, we don't know what cards we've stolen from our opponents. We are going to assume we are playing without their cards. We move into turn 7, and we still don't have a land drop available to us. So let's go ahead and swing with all of our evasive creatures real quick. Hello, I'm trying to make a copy of the token? Why can't I make a copy of the token? That's weird. There we go. Apparently Moxfield and Caps Lock do not get along. So we are going ahead and swinging with these 3 creatures, which will draw us 1, 2, 3, 4 cards because of the Suspicious Stowaway, and we will discard a single card. Now I'm comfortable getting rid of the Sepulchre Primordial because we did, in fact, get a land drop. And more important than the land drop, we actually got a card that will throw the entire game in our favor. So we have a bunch of cards from our opponents, thanks to Gaunty. We don't know what those cards are, but we are going to cast a big spell. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. We cast Breach the Multiverse. Breach the Multiverse makes everybody mill 10 cards. After it makes them mill 10 cards, it makes us summon a card from each opponent's graveyard as well as our own. We are going to grab the Sepulchre Primordial. The Primordial, when it touches the battlefield, steals another card from each of our opponents. Meaning, with this one card, we are summoning 7 creatures. 4 creatures from Breach the Multiverse, and then an additional 3 from the Sepulchre Primordial. This gives us a huge board state, way bigger than what it looks like right here. You can't actually tell how big our board state is because we are working with imaginary creatures we have stolen from our opponents. Given that the card we have on the board is Enduring Curiosity as we move to the end step and start discarding cards, I think we can go ahead and get rid of the Reconnaissance Mission from our hand. As much as I don't want to get rid of it, the Enduring Curiosity does come back if it dies, so it's unlikely we are going to lose that at any point. The other card I would get rid of at this point is probably our Likeness Looter, as we have access to Draina and Shadowmage Infiltrator as evasive creatures, and we want to keep our ramp spells here to filter into our deck a little bit, and we never want to get rid of our removal spells if we have the option to keep them. Moving into turn 8, playing Rejuvenating Springs and making another token with our Bitter Blossom. We have a giant board of things stolen from our opponents. Let's go ahead and assume that we just turn everything sideways and delete one of those opponents out of the way, and we will use Hold Up Fel the Profane and use Feed the Swarm to get rid of whatever our other opponent had available. Swinging with all of our creatures would draw us an insane amount of cards, forcing us to discard one with the Stowaway. I'd say at this point we just get rid of the recurable River Prowler, and what I would like to have done is drawn into the Reliquary Tower here to keep our giant hand, but we didn't draw into the Reliquary Tower. That's entirely fine. We still have access to 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 mana still, and with 6 mana, what we can do is we have to hold up 4 of it for Fel the Profane no matter what we do. That's basically non-negotiable. So, because we already have a board state, we can just get another land out of the deck with our Nature's Lore and be ready for whatever our opponents do after that point. We let our opponents know we are searching for Submissive and Breeding Pool. That is out on the board now, untapped, and, well, that still allows us 5 mana to do whatever we want with. We don't have a lot of instant spells in our hand, so we are basically relying on creature removal to protect us from whatever our opponents might do on their turn, but even if we get a board wipe, we can just hard cast Archon of Cruelty on our next turn, which will put us in a very good position, giving us access to Archon and 1 Bitter Blossom token, as well as the Enduring Curiosity, which will still be on the board. That said, I find that when you upgrade the deck into this, it turns into a very, very resilient machine. Even though it doesn't have all the tricks that the original one did, and maybe loses a little bit of the original deck's flavor, I find that adding in generically good cards that just do what your deck wants to do, not just what your commander wants to do, leads to a more solid game plan that is able to handle more things your opponent may be trying to aim your way. But I do want to throw this back to you guys as well, because at the end of the day, if you end up building this thing, it's going to be your deck. And I want to know in the comment section below how you're going to make this deck your deck, if you decide to do that. And, you know, it's a Spell Thief deck, so far be it from me to get upset if you copy the damn thing. That all said, thank you all for watching. I appreciate each and every one of you. If you are going to be in MagFest this year, let me know. I am going to be doing a panel with a friend of mine on whether Sonic the Hedgehog is still good or is back, however you want to word that. Hopefully I will see some of you there on the Friday and Saturday that I will be there at the convention. That all said, thank you for coming here and watching my shit. We will get back to budget builds in the next video. As always, everybody, thank you for being here, and insert end video tagline here. Hey, just wanted to give a quick thank you to all of my wonderful patrons who help keep me afloat and help keep this channel going. YouTube and Twitch are wonderful platforms, but at the end of the day, stability is not one of their strong suits. If you want to support my channel, then obviously Patreon is one of the best ways of doing that. Link is in the description. But I do want to personally thank everybody who has contributed to the channel. Those people would be Red Joker, Purple Poundini, Jemshin, Britzkrieg, Jupe the Malignant, Michael, Ravalern, Mabbity Babbity, Astral Frontier, Autumn and Angel, Nixie Chan, Agamotto, Victorian Alchemist, I'm not saying the last part of that, and you know that, Arcton Arclacier, Kiratorian, Dren Hadamata, Jordan M, John L, Lord Bleck, Smiling Game Master, and Fire Shard. And everyone else who supports my channel and lets me do what I do full time. This is a dream job of mine that I never believed that I would be able to take full time, and with your help, I've been able to do it. So thank you so very much for that. Thank you for watching the video. I hope you all enjoy, and I hope you all are having a wonderful time. I will see you all in the next one, hopefully.